Hi, my name's Mark Chatters. I prepared a short video about the Equifax data breach of 2017. It's a great case study for cybersecurity professionals. It's really well documented and there's lots of information on the web. So what I've done is I've just taken everything together, tried to make sense of it for you. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you find it interesting. Thanks very much.
This is one of the largest data breaches in history. It happened at Equifax.
How does this happen when so much is at stake? I don't think we can pass a law that, excuse me for saying this, but fixes stupid. I can't fix stupid, as a colleague of mine used to say.
Apparently there were multiple points where this hack could have been prevented, and one of them is incredible because Equifax were alerted by Homeland Security back in March that they needed to fix a critical vulnerability in their software.
Money tonight, and after that major data breach, your personal information, Equifax is now paying a record amount.
Okay, here it is, data breach on the page. Equifax, 145 million Americans had their personal data breached. Cost to the company. So it's still going up even 2 years later, but at the moment I think we're at a running cost of about $1.6 billion. So it's a combination of expenses reported by Equifax, a settlement, FTC settlement, and a class action settlement as well, but I think there will be more. So that's kind of costs. This is the hit to the enterprise value of the company. It's always hard to say where Equifax would be, but look, at the moment it's definitely the laggard out of the big three credit reporting agencies. You can see that the Equifax is the red line, and you can see that big dip September 2017, and it really hasn't recovered since then. And last but not least, executive casualties. So who got the chop or who resigned? 3 people resigned. There's actually 4 people resigned: CEO, CIO, CISO, and Jung Ying, the senior VP, and we'll come back to him. And Graham Payne was the bunny who got the blame. Okay, before we go any further, here's just a bit of context. So this is a nice little diagram from the Wall Street Journal that says how CRAs work, or credit reporting agencies work. Basically, they just keep a record of the financial commitments you've entered into, how much money you've borrowed, what your repayment history is, etc., etc. Equifax, yeah, quite a big company. IT, nearly around 8,000 people in IT, and even at the time of the breach back in 2017, nearly 200 people in security. Here's a bit of a glossary. These things will come up. ACIS is the system that kind of got breached, if you like, or hacked. GTVM is a committee, committee that looks after vulnerabilities. Patchy Struts, you probably all know what that is. And the SSL Visibility Appliance, will come back to that later. Okay, let's look at the timeline. Well, Richard Smith, the CEO, has been around for a while. He was appointed in 2005 and did quite a few acquisitions, grew the business. There was an internal audit on their patch and configuration management in 2015, not very complimentary. And in 2016, November 2016, they had a certificate on the SSL Visibility Appliance expired. So the question is, what does that mean? Okay, SSL Visibility Appliance, what is it and why is it important? Well, the ACIS system had a web portal, and like any good system, the web portal used encrypted traffic, so it used HTTPS. So we love encrypted traffic as security people, but it does come a little bit of a downside. It means it's hard for us to inspect that traffic and see whether there's any malware, anybody trying to exploit the flows. So what Equifax did, and a lot of other companies do, in this case, is put an appliance in between called an SSL Visibility Appliance, and that takes a copy, has a copy of the key that's used to encrypt some of the traffic, has that, and then it can decrypt it, and it can make sure that there's no nasties there. Now, as you probably know, certificates have an end date. They don't last forever. So what Equifax would have done is that when coming up to the end date, they would have installed a new certificate. So that's what they did. They put a new certificate and a new key on the ACIS system. But what they didn't do, what they didn't appear to do, is actually do the necessary refresh on the SSL Visibility Appliance. So therefore, as of November 2016, the SSL Visibility Appliance couldn't look in the traffic anymore. And the default setting for that appliance appears to be that if it can't decrypt it, just let the traffic through. So they were running blind. Okay, so the vulnerability, 7th of March, the vulnerability was publicly disclosed. The next day, US notified Equifax, and the day after that, the GTVM team sent an internal email notifying them of the issue. Unfortunately, of the 400 people that received that email, none of them, I don't think, realized that the severity of it. A few days later, the Equifax security team updated the IPS signatures to detect the exploits. How was that ever going to happen, I hear you ask? Good question. I don't think it ever was. It probably didn't. Next day after that, they were doing external vulnerability scans. So a few weeks later, hackers finally got into the Equifax network via the unpatched Apache Struts vulnerability. They appear to have found a file share with usernames and passwords, which they found very useful. And then over the next coming weeks, they performed nearly 9,000 database queries to extract PII data out of the Equifax environment. Now, going back to the SSL visibility appliance, there was a sort of a parallel piece of work to update the signatures there, or update the keys. They got around to the ASIS system, they did that, and they started looking at the traffic going out, and they were pretty horrified. The next day, it became clear that they'd been hacked. They finally did another vulnerability scan of the ASIS system, discovered there was an unpatched vulnerability there, and they shut ASIS down. A few days later, they patched the system. They called in the lawyers, who in turn called in Mandiant, cybersecurity experts. Mandiant did some forensic examination through August. Now, bear in mind, they haven't actually told the public here. I reckon about 145 million consumers were affected. Zhongying, one of the executive casualties we talked about earlier, sold his shares. Bear in mind, again, no one knows about this outside Equifax. Finally, on the 7th of September, Equifax notifies the public of the breach. And a day later, they created a website for consumers, worried consumers, to sort of lodge to see whether they've been affected. So another detour from the timeline. They created a website for consumers to log, to see whether they've been affected by the data breach. And what happened next? Well, he explains it so much better than I could.
And you would hope that Equifax would do a decent job of mitigating the damage. After all, they did have nearly 6 weeks to work on a response, but instead, their fuck-ups continued. For instance, they created a website for concerned consumers to go to, but then this happened.
The site that Equifax started is called Equifax Security 2017, but a developer named Nick Sweeting wanted to show how easy it is to create a similar fake site, so he did. He called it Security Equifax 2017.
Exactly, someone created a fake site, and if you're thinking, well, who would be dumb enough to fall for that? Equifax, that's who, because they tweeted links to that fake site at least 8 times, despite the fact that site had a couple of tiny clues that it might be fake, from the headline reading, "Why did Equifax use a domain that's so easily impersonated by phishing sites?" to the fact that when you clicked on their frequently asked questions, this happened. Well played, pranksters. You have my respect.
Yeah, so pretty bad. So, a week or two later, CIO and CISO announced their retirements, and a few days after that, the CEO, Richard Smith, announced his retirement. He departed from the company as well. Equifax they sacked Graham Payne. They were saying it was all his fault because he failed to forward the email. And throughout October, Richard Smith was testifying in Washington, trying to explain what had happened. Also in October, Zhongying resigned as well. So, should Zhongying have sold his shares? Well, let's see how that went.
Equifax's former CIO, Zhongying, has been criminally charged with selling almost $1 million worth of shares right before the company's announcement last year, that it had suffered a massive data breach. And I say the same thing. How does this happen?
Well,
I mean, don't these people realize...
That's just stupidity.
Right, that's stupidity.
That's why...
Yeah, he shouldn't have done that. And subsequent to that, he was actually jailed, I believe, for 4 months. So yeah, that's not good. Okay, so here's some of the learnings. I guess don't ignore warnings. So act on internal audit reports. Make sure that the findings are addressed properly. When you buy technology, don't forget people and process. So the SSL visibility appliance, they had the technology, but they didn't have the process to keep the keys in line with the systems that it was supposed to be protecting. Make sure you have an asset inventory or a CMDB. So it's very hard to protect against vulnerabilities without that kind of stuff. It's very hard to scan. Maintain technical contacts in your CMDB as well. So the actual key developer, the developer that knew that Apache Struts was being used, wasn't included on the GTV email distribution list. So that he or she wasn't able to act on that information. And also, if hackers do get in, don't make it easy for them. So Equifax was found to have poor internal network segregation and poor operational hygiene. So leaving, an example of that is leaving user IDs and passwords lying around for the bad guys to use. So, Mr. Smith went to Washington, and here's a bit of video of him, well, basically throwing Graham Payne under the bus. And I've also got a bit of commentary afterwards.
Human error was the individual who was responsible for communicating in the organization to apply the patch did not.
So does that mean that that individual knew that the software was there and it needed to be patched and did not communicate that to the team that does the patching? Is that the heart of the issue here?
That is my understanding, sir.
And there's no, I was on a bank board for a while, and we always had sort of double checks on everybody, right? Do you not have a double check of some sort, an audit of some sort? Is there? It seems like that was a single point.
There was one person apparently who forgot to tell somebody that they had a piece of software that needed to be patched.
Yeah, it is not ideal that a company guarding such valuable information leaves something that important down to one person. It's like finding out that Chase Bank has a big red button labelled "Lose Everyone's Money," and the only thing stopping anyone from pushing it is Frank. And look, I love Frank. I love the guy, but what if he has to pee?
Okay, yeah, well, that was Mr. Smith's line. The US House of Reps weren't convinced, so here's what they had to say about that. The real root causes, well, I've picked out a few from the House of Reps report. I mean, there are a number of recommendations there, so I'm just picking out a few. I suppose as final thoughts, look, Equifax's competitors, TransUnion and Experian, also had Apache Struts, but both of them managed to patch it. And if you look at the share price impact, the relative share price, look, Equifax really is paying the price for that, even now today. So thanks very much for watching this. If you're interested in learning more, here are, I think there's heaps of information out there, but I think here are some really good references. Both the US Congress and the House of Reps did reports, they're both pretty good. And there's some other stuff there as well. And finally, look up John Oliver's Last Week Tonight on Equifax. It's absolutely priceless.